welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right, your left is...
Sebastian, the archivist.
How's it going, Sebastian?
Doing good, and you?
It's a good week. You'll notice in this beautiful studio, we have floored the floor. You probably didn't notice because you can see so little of it, but it used to be concrete. Now it's fake wood, so that's an upgrade right there. It's all from the big cash we're making from the podcast, which is all of negative dollars. We normally rotate between a response video and a non-response theological video, so we're still doing that this week. But just to shout it out, last week's video was a response to Redeem Zoomer and is doing really well for the Found Cause standard of things, meaning people are interested, they're engaged, they're raging in the comments, which is good. It means you made something meaningful. I think typically we're not trying to instigate rage. We'd rather have comments that are like, "That was great, so edifying, I love it," which we got like one, which usually we don't. But rage is another sign that at least you spoke about something people care about, and so we did that. And thanks to Sebastian, because Sebastian doesn't normally respond to comments. I mean, you sometimes do. Anyways, you put in some very meaningful comments that instigated a lot of rage.
It wasn't even my intention to cause people to rage, just something to consider and then give a thoughtful response. And then a lot of people just get very upset.
And maybe my wife was suggesting we do like a review of comments at some point. Maybe we'll do another one of those. We've done an episode like that before because they aren't... Some comments are like totally worthless. If you go to like a music video on YouTube, it probably has the most worthless comments you've ever seen. However, so some of our videos also have like just trash. I didn't agree with this, or more explicit versions of that. But these comments and several other videos have like at least educated comments, even if I don't agree with them. So it'd be worth a video. But speaking of like nasty comments and anger, today's episode is on a very softy subject, which I personally usually never pick up a book about these things. I never watch podcasts about these things, but it is real issues that Christians face every day. So we're going to talk about it. And that is conflict management in the church, within the church, amongst brothers. That's the big title. Subtitle could be, we're not talking about excommunicatable offenses. We're talking about the little ones, the little offenses that, so classically, there's a section in Matthew 16, I think, where Christ talks about what do you do if a brother sins against you in the church? And you go to him, just you and him. And then if he refuses to be corrected, you go to him with a couple others, 2 to 3 independent witnesses. And then if he still refuses to repent, denounce him before the church. And then if he still refuses to repent, kick him out. Those kind of offenses, I think we would all agree. Maybe some would not. That those should be saved for large offenses that you'd be willing to kick somebody out of the church for, right? I would say offenses that either deny the gospel, or they're like officially against limited church teaching, or they are they're worthy of death. So like the guy is a murderer and refuses to repent, or any of the things that would break God's law that would require death, that is a sin that leads to death. We would say those require this level of engagement. But if somebody stepped on your toe and never said sorry, I don't think the correct thing for a Christian to do should be to confront him one-on-one. And then if he still doesn't say sorry, is to bring in 2 to 3 fellow people with you. And then if he still doesn't say he's sorry, then bring in the elders and eventually excommunicate him because he refuses to forgive you for the toe stepping. I mean, I think you should say sorry for stepping on your toes, but it isn't worth the conflict that comes with that to correct him on that. I say all this to say, I think it's an important issue to handle conflict like that, because you may have experienced this in your own church, or maybe we just need to tell you, but conflicts like those, the toe stepping or the equivalent, somebody played a song that they didn't think was appropriate, or somebody didn't invite another member to their birthday party and the other person felt left out. I don't know the stats exactly, but those seem like the vast majority of conflicts that come up in the church. It's not typically some guy in the back doesn't believe that Jesus is God. I mean, that's a serious issue and should be corrected, but that's not usually how churches break up, split apart, have major drama. It's typically amongst Christians, or at least so-called Christians, and their small issues that metastasize, nobody deals with them, they stay embittered, and that brings up some boiling point later on.
Also, I have to say from experience, church finances, you're spending too much on children's ministry. You're spending too little on children's ministry. Anathemas fly everywhere. No, you need to take a step back, and we can actually resolve this when it comes to finances or accidental bumping into each other, not saying hi to someone. you can make music suggestions, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, so that's the intro to the episode where we're talking about it's interchurch conflict, but the small kind and why it's important. There it is. It can like blow up churches, and we all know it can. If you've ever been around the block a couple times, you know that small issues can become big if both parties don't resolve it. The epistles, especially, so the books of the Bible, are full of handling that problem because it does show up even in the early church, right? It's part of human nature to have this kind of conflict. Maybe it would also help us to define a couple categories of this kind of conflict, just so you know what it is even more concretely. Budget issues. Whatever budget is spent, I guess because it's so black and white on what churches' priorities are when they show you their budget, it seems like everybody and their dad comes out of the woodwork and is like, what if we save $3 here? Or what if we take those $3 and shove them somewhere else? And typically it's arguing over pennies, and also typically it's a huge nothing. Like it wouldn't really matter had anybody's opinions being listened to, because probably the church is doing something fine with the money. Like it's probably not viciously awful. I reserve the rights of people to cause conflict if the budget is like funding Hezbollah or something like that, but it's probably not doing that. So that's a category of conflict. What are other categories of conflict? We talked about, I guess, physical altercations. Yeah, that would be a category of conflict.
It doesn't even have to be violent. It could just be accidental. Or passive aggressiveness, pretty big in the Midwest.
Yeah, and maybe to this point, you will hear a lot of people complaining, especially if they're church hoppers and they're shopping for churches, that a church wasn't friendly. And I think often that sentiment that a church is not friendly can last for years. So it's not just like somebody's first impression, but maybe somebody's 5 years into being part of a church and they are suddenly embittered that somebody didn't invite them to something, or nobody is inviting them to anything. Like they just feel like they're not involved in the church, and therefore they hold it as a resentment, a conflict, that the church is cliquey. They form cliques and won't let them join, or is not hospitable, or whatever. They can lob an accusation like that, and it could be true, but how do you handle that kind of conflict? I would call that social conflict, right? So it's like specifically around not getting invited to things, not being high-fived, that kind of, not being poured into via social interaction, or too much, I suppose. Same category. It's like too much, lay off. What are some others?
Gossip. Or it also counts as social interactions.
No, that's probably a totally different one. That's not like lack or too much of. That's like real slights. So gossip, I put it in its whole own category, because it's not a sin worthy of death. But gossiping about somebody doesn't even need to be slander, right? To be gossip is just distributing information about somebody that they didn't want shared. It could definitely cause conflict. We all know that it can cause conflict anywhere, especially in the church. Slander, of course, comes to that. I think slander probably crosses the line into something you'd want to correct, even though it's not a death-worthy sin. It's like such a intentional, malicious sin. It's not just a casual sin. It's like you meant to do that to somebody. So I would think, just on an intuitive level, that would be something you could approach the person on, and to do the Matthew 16 formula. So probably is outside of the scope of this conversation, because it's like real malicious attacking. Same with if somebody like intentionally assaulted you in the church parking lot or something like that. That warrants a like direct conflict afterwards of like forgiveness, formal excommunication eventually, because it was like so direct. I think the things that don't usually warrant the full escalation to Matthew 16 style stuff are things that are either so casual that somebody forgot about it afterwards, even if they did it intentionally at the time, or they didn't mean to at all.
Another one that takes it from like 1 to 10 pretty quickly is, in my experience, how things are done in the church. And by that, I mean admin. I mean how decisions are made, and also how you do worship, the service itself. That includes style of music, how the liturgy is, for lack of a better word, orchestrated. Do you do the sermon at the end? Do you do the sermon right in the middle? Do you communion at the end? Do you communion at the beginning? That's what I mean by it. And more like logistics, I suppose. And how the church is laid out, like what you wouldn't believe all the things that people fight over. What seats you want to use or purchase? What needs to be replaced?
And it maybe, and that's enough. I mean, there's
Yeah,
probably some other
I know.
category. That's enough to give you an idea of these kind of conflicts that can arise. I think, well, we're going to share some scripture about it. I think a lot of these issues, especially those kind of issues, can be resolved not easily because it's difficult to do, but very simply by simple principles.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being what we're going to read about now. So let's talk about 1 Peter 5, which I think opens up two other dynamics, which is in churches, there are leaders and there are non-leaders. And what if leaders disagree with each other, what are they to do? How are they to handle conflict? If congregants disagree with each other, how are they to handle conflict? And if elders disagree with congregants or congregants disagree with elders, which I think congregants disagreeing with elders happens a lot more than the other way around, just because there's more congregants to elder ratio. How do you handle that conflict? And for the most part, those issues, the church layout or like admin issues, are congregant to elder conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they could also be within elders, but typically elders, I don't know, they have more perspective because they do this all the time. They know that it's not that big of a deal, so they just let somebody have their way. But congregants, I don't know, they tend to be more opinionated. I speak as a congregant, so not an elder. So let's read from 1 Peter 5, which talks about elders and congregants.
Shall I read?
Yeah.
Therefore, as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of the Messiah, and also a participant in the glory about to be revealed, I exhort the elders among you, shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but freely, according to God's will, not for the money, but eagerly, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. In the same way, you younger men, be subject to the elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your care on him, because he cares about you.
So things that stand out to me there are, in the very beginning, he exhorts the elder, shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but freely. So if you're an elder, realize it's a privilege and don't feel like don't hold it as a burden that you have to carry. And likewise, don't lord it over those entrusted to you. Be examples to the flock of good leadership. And so I think the key word there is lording it over somebody who entrusted to you, meaning don't be domineering or not explain yourself, or realize that being an elder over somebody else is not necessarily a sign of great superiority. It's purely a role that you're playing in the church, and therefore you shouldn't act as somebody's great mental superior, even if you are. I like caveat it because surely there are people who are really smart in eldership and people who are not really smart as congregants, and the elder could just be right by virtue of them being smart and the congregant not, or experienced and the congregant not. But this is saying that don't lord it over them, but be an example to them. Explain yourself as an elder. Assert your authority like God asserts his over you, and that God, in all of our lived experience, doesn't often almost ever force you to do stuff or explain things to you impatiently, because he's tremendously patient, and if you wait for God to speak to you in life, you probably won't hear it very often at all, because he's incredibly patient. So I think we should rule as we like to be ruled by God, and that is very gently.
The relationship between elders or presbyters in a church is not that of a general and soldier. It's more, not exactly the same, but more like a facilitator in a congregation. You're there to lead by example, as it says here, and provide conflict resolution if anything comes up, as we'll see later on in Church in Corinth. And also, you're part of the congregation, so it's not like you're a special elite in the group. You could be a permanent elder, you could be there for a time. It's up to the church to decide, I would say. So it's important, but you're not superior to the others.
And then likewise, the second half of this was about the younger men. So the younger men, women, insert yourself, the non-elders. be subject to the elders and clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. It may seem self-explanatory, but I'll spell it out for the sake of everybody listening. Being subject to the elders means on things that elders have authority over, which maybe it warrants a conversation on exactly what elders have authority on, but on things they have authority on, which definitely include scheduled worship times and style of music and anything admin related, like Sebastian was saying, that whole category is definitely something that is the elder's job. Be subject to them and clothe yourself with humility. You may have an opinion on when the church should open up and when the window should be open in the summertime, and all the like little decisions that get made by the elders or staff that you are not one of. Keep them to yourself unless asked. That's being subject to generally means keep your opinions to yourself unless asked, and enjoy it. That's what being subject means, and that can be very hard because you see the thing that you think you want corrected and it's not being corrected. Maybe it's intentionally being non-corrected by the eldership because they have an opinion that you don't agree with, but you are to be subject to them. I think with the only exceptions of if somebody is wildly sinning, then you can resist because the elder is just an elder. They're not God. They're not some other special authority. They are just an elder. But that should, in theory, in practice, eliminate a whole category of possible conflict because you just agree to listen to the elders, even if you don't understand why they're doing things that way.
Part of the elders' job too is to teach. So if they're teaching heresy or strange doctrine, that's another time you can approach them first in a polite, collected manner, and then you can follow the steps that you said from Matthew, get other people, and then the whole church.
And there's probably a time to speak up when not asked if you are truly and purely trying to help them avoid sin or pain. For example, if there was a budget issue that you knew without a shadow of a doubt was going to end in total church disaster, and you know that talking to the elders, that they will listen wisely and like they need to hear your voice in this matter. Okay, there's room for wisdom in speaking into these things when not asked, but I would say be really careful with that discernment, because often that is not how people speak into budget issues. It's not how people speak into admin issues. Typically, you're sitting in the congregation and you see a budget line item, and you've not been in any of the conversations about how that budget line item was invented and determined, and you think, why are we paying that much for facilities or for missionaries or for whatever? Insert a category you think you could be spending less on, and then you say, why are you doing that? I know John Smith down the road who cuts grass for $5 a day, or whatever. And it's not really a big issue. And so why are you creating conflict in this area? I would wait for the elders to respond. So even if you think you could be saving your eldership, pennies of money, essentially really non-major money for the church, and it would be so easy if they just listened to you and did the thing they asked, I would wait. Be subject to the elders and wait. It's not lack of love there. It's not lack of love to not speak up like that. So that's two categories at least of issues that I think should be dealt with very simply. Again, it's easier said than done because you will have to bite your lip and hold your tongue and to be subject to elders that you disagree with. But what else do you make of this command from Peter to be subject to the elders? What is it to be subject to the elders except to decide to agree with them even if you don't? Otherwise, it's not really being subject to them if it's only when you agree with them that you agree with them, right? Yeah. So the other categories of conflict: interpersonal sin. Somebody either accidentally elbowed you because they weren't looking, or they didn't invite you to a birthday party spitefully or not, or they didn't go up and make an effort to talk to you when you were alone in a pew. That kind of conflict is not so elder to congregant focused, and I don't think it's easily fixed by just being subject to the elders, because you yourself might be subject to the elders and still are left uninvited to the birthday party, or still beat up accidentally by somebody's baby carrier. What do you do then? I think First John is a great book. It's kind of a scary book because it speaks in very broad tones. They'll say, like, we know that anyone born of God does not continue to sin. Okay, but we we do continue to sin. Does that mean we aren't born of God? Well, First John also says that anybody who says they don't sin is a liar. So you have to take it knowing that it's going to speak kind of hyperbolistically like that. However, it's very practical in speaking to, I would say, wantonly emotional congregants and Christians. And so it speaks to issues like these conflicts. And one of them at the very end of 1 John chapter 5 says this: if you see a brother or sister commit a sin that does not lead to death, you should pray and God will give them life. I refer to those whose sin does not lead to death. There is a sin that leads to death, and I'm not saying that you should pray about that. All wrongdoing is sin, and there is sin that does not lead to death. How would you interpret this text?
You should always have the attitude of prayer towards it for the other person and to God, unless there is your sibling in Christ is committing a sin that would be punishable by death. And then we'll interpret this according to the Old Testament law. That's something that does lead to death. And would you say, as an example, being greedy is a sin, but it's not worthy of death.
Right.
Whereas murdering someone is also a sin, but it is worthy of death.
Right.
Okay. So that's why he says there is a sin that leads to death.
And he says there is a sin that does not lead to death. So, because you might argue that every sin leads to death because it separates us from God and it will eventually lead to death. Yes. So clearly this death is not that kind of death. This is like death via the law. That's why we argue that way. And it would seem to make a lot of sense that if somebody that you see a brother or sister that commits a sin that does not lead to death, i.e., it's not murder, it's not adultery, it's not apostasy or any of these other sin, death worthy things, but instead it's greed or something minor, it's still sin. So it's not that it's not wrong. When somebody accidentally elbowed you in the face and didn't say sorry, it's still sin, it's still wrong. When somebody isn't friendly to you and you're left alone in the pew, or if somebody intentionally doesn't invite you to something because they don't like you, that is still sin. However, it's not one that leads to death. And this whole section is actually in context of right before John is talking about God answers prayers. And we know that he hears us. Whatever we ask, we know that we have what we have asked of him. Like God is going to grant your prayers. And so the thought here is that you should pray and God will give them, the person you're praying about, life. So if somebody was greedy, they were selfish, they were non-nice to you in church, pray for them like you pray for an enemy, except in this case, it's more than an enemy. It's a brother, it's a sister, it's a neighbor. Pray for them that they not be greedy, that they not be impolite or selfish or non-social or rude. Whatever slight they've done to you, pray for them. Instead of confronting them and going the Matthew 16 route or bringing it up to the elders or putting them on your hit list or keeping bitterness, I think much more likely what you're going to do is like keep a record of like, Johnny Smith didn't sit with me today. Day 8, he did not look at me. Pray for Johnny and pray that he does look at you and that he is friendly, and pray for yourself in the same way. That, I believe, is the ideal church conflict resolution, is praying for each other and letting God change hearts in the congregation, because we know that God does answer prayers. And so if you don't believe that that's a legitimate way for you to resolve this low-level conflict, it's a faithless thing to do, because you're saying that you don't believe that God will do these things that he has said he will.
And just before this, John is writing, I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know you have eternal life. So he's writing to people that are partakers in the kingdom of God. Isn't just some randos that, maybe the pagan out there has slighted you. No, this is someone who's going to be in the kingdom with you, so treat them with grace. Whether they deserve it or not, you should still pray for them. That's a sign of grace. And also in the note of asking God, he even continues, John, this is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have what we asked of him. I think God wants the church to be in harmony.
And he wants, if you've identified a legitimate sin from your brother or sister, he wants that sin to be destroyed. So pray for it.
Metaphorically destroyed, not with an executioner's axe.
Right. Yes. And again, it's going to sound like toddlerish, but the golden rule, the Christ's command, and the root of the law, which is treat others as you would want to be treated. So if you were having a bad day, or you just forgot and you forgot to invite Johnny to your birthday party, wouldn't you want him to be praying for you as opposed to confronting you or putting you on his hit list, his dirty list? You wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want him keeping your wrongs against you, so don't do it to others. Again, all this is very basic milk, you might think, because it's very like interpersonal. It could be in an episode of Barney style speaking, but it is so crucial. The foundation work like this is so crucial to keeping a congregation and a church family happy, because you can have a very theologically sound congregation that believes all their T's and C's when it comes to God being sovereign and saving people and rejecting sins of the world and making sure that you're not conforming to the culture of this world, and yet they still keep hit lists. I would say, like you mentioned, Sebastian, it's very common in our part of the country, which is Scandinavian in origin, and a setting sin of the Scandinavian population is like grudge lists, like there's some sort of fantasy dwarf, and they don't often, just a common sin in these parts, they don't often resolve conflicts. They often keep grudges, and that can happen anywhere, but it's just a sin that's common here. And so we have very theologically sound churches here, and that are beset by this sin that is common in the area. And so I think it's more important than we make it out to be, because it is so prevalent and does have a lot of say into or sway over how churches actually operate, and whether or not you have friends in the church, you have healthy givers, you have loving pastors who speak into your lives. Like all those things are affected by whether or not you are able to let go of the small things and be subject to your elders, or vice versa, not lord your eldership over your congregants, and be careful about the small things, because they are still sins. I mean, that's maybe that goes without saying here too.
Yeah, perhaps I can give an example of this interaction. So there was this one person, in my old church, that left because this other member of the congregation was he was very expressive, very social, very friendly, and this other person wasn't used to that. And this other individual felt that it was not appropriate. There was investigation. There was nothing bad happened. It was truly just a clash of personalities. And apparently, then this person that felt uncomfortable reached out to the leadership, and because this seemed very strange, like, how can you complain about someone being too friendly and social? Mm-hmm. Nothing was really done about the matter, and then the person kept rancor, let's say, animosity, a hit list, pretty much, into this, and then eventually just blew up, and then the person ended up leaving the church over that.
Right.
It's like there's no communication ever. The leadership doesn't communicate or address problems in the congregation. It just suddenly exploded. So something as simple as that can build up over time, and unfortunately lead to someone just not wanting to be part of the congregation. And there was I don't think any party set out to, like, I'm going to sabotage this person, I'm going to be abusive, I'm going to make someone uncomfortable, either in any party. So it's just misunderstanding.
And it maybe to that point too, when you are, it's easy enough to say you should forgive your brothers and sisters, and you should be subject to your elders or not lord it over people. But what do you do as an elder or as a congregant when when somebody else is sinning, right, and they refuse to forgive? That's a harder question, because what was it, a mistake? Was it a shortfalling of the elders at your church that they didn't help this person, or was it really just inevitable that this person was going to keep bitterness in their heart about this other individual, and they were like inevitably going to leave because of this conflict?
It felt like it was the drop of water that overflowed the glass. Mm-hmm. There were other things in there. I don't know. This person had a discussion with the pastor. His impression was that there were other things involved, and this is just what let everything exploded after that. And
it's hard as eldership to handle it, because ultimately the problem is with the congregant in that case, and it's because of the bitterness list that they're keeping in their hearts that they get so embittered that it blows up over something small, and they leave. And I think it behooves the eldership to speak on this matter more frequently because it is so important, so that the congregants are well informed. At least they know the way they should be acting, even if they aren't acting that way. And I think you'd want to treat your sheep the way you'd want to be treated. So even if they come to you in sin, saying this small thing is bothering me, they're disobeying First John here. They're not letting go of something small. I think an appropriate response is to handle that with grace, as the Lord would do to us. We should do to our congregants. Think about how you would want to be handled if you were thinking something was a big deal that actually was not. So I think it is an appropriate response to turn a congregant to look at this and say, don't sweat the small stuff. But do it, I think, not so bluntly, because they think it's an issue enough that they're talking to you about it. So this is a blanket statement to not be absent, an absent father, an absent elder in the church, because you do want to make sure that you are engaged with your congregation and not addressing conflict, because it will metastasize and cause.
Yeah. Even if you think it's absolutely insignificant, address it quickly if need be.
And honestly, if an immature congregant, or maybe they are mature and it's a real issue, but if it's a non-issue or it's a real issue, they come to you about it, it probably does warrant a face-to-face interaction with the accuser and the accusee, as God's law would have us do. The accuser was probably uncomfortable with that interaction, and that's why they came to you in the first place. But it's inappropriate, really, for them to have come to you without having gone to the person first. As Matthew 16 would say, they've escalated the excommunication effort too soon, probably. And so you should help them graciously start with just talking to the person, because it may resolve itself right there. And I think pastors really do need to grow some courage to do that more often, because it's scary and the accuser will probably fight you. Because they don't want to address the conflict with the person, because they're afraid of what the person will do. They're afraid that you as an elder might take the side of their enemy, and then they'll be tag teams. They're afraid of that, and that's an important step in maturing that congregant that gave a bad accusation, or maybe it was a good accusation and things work out that way for them. But if they really did give a bad accusation, it would be a very important maturing point for them to end up in a situation where they realize they're in the wrong and they're getting tag teamed by you as the elder and the person they accused. That is an important pain lesson for them. So don't shy away from it. It's the command of the Bible to approach conflict like that. Anything else on that topic?
On not addressing an issue that could potentially explode, well, I would say that didn't happen in the church in Corinth. So if you struggle perhaps seeing that in church, just know that it could happen. Happened in Corinth when Paul writes 2 letters to the Corinthians, and apparently that wasn't enough. There was a lot of shenanigans going on, people getting drunk during the Lord's Supper, which was a feast back in the day, before it was just a simple dunking of bread in wine.
The tiniest sample of grape juice you can find, and the smallest morsel of bread.
Right, it was a feast. That's why people were getting drunk. And then as much as Paul tried to counsel these people, something went awry afterwards. Then we have one of the first post-Bible Christian writings, the letter of Clement, or the letter of the Church of Rome. Some say this wasn't just Clement. He could have been a secretary. He could have been an elder. Could have been the elder. Hard to determine back then. It's been 2,000 years. And he writes, "What madness has bewitched you, pretty much? How have you let but a few rash and self-confident persons have kindled such a pitch of frenzy that your venerable and illustrious name, worthy to be universally loved, has suffered grievous injury?" And what happened was that the Church of Corinth had kicked out their previous elders and installed some rash, envious people as new elders that wanted to seize power.
And to that point, this is a special category of conflict interest. And if you haven't listened to anything so far because it hasn't been pertinent to you, I think you should listen to this one, because it affected the United States very much, and probably your area too. COVID required major conflict resolution skills because everybody was in conflict with each other at that time. And I know it's a little bit ago now. It's like 4 years ago now, but it it was a time of major conflict, and I would say it showed the conflict resolution skills of churches, or showed the lack of conflict resolution skills of churches when they had major issues on this. It's one thing for the congregation to be freaking out, but it's another thing for the elders to be allowing it to affect the church. And it comes from stuff like that, like rash and envious or whatever. Some character from the congregation has a very strong opinion, whether it was super anti-COVID or super pro the mainstream COVID narrative. Both were extremely strong opinions at the time that wanted to conflict with each other. And let me read Corinthians. So Corinthians, Clement has to read to them. Paul writes to them twice. If anything, they were accursed for our sake. Like, God let them be crazy so that we could see what it's like to handle craziness. And, they were more crazy than your church. I promise you they were more crazy than your church. And Paul still called them brothers and still wrote to them. And so did Clement, even after all the fiasco. In Corinth, there were, I had many issues, but one of them being angry people who are sinning against each other. And to connect it back to COVID, in COVID, often an excuse I would hear from pastors or even congregants that are hearing heat from other congregants on the mask issue. So that you can insert alcohol here, you can insert whatever you want, because there are many issues like this where somebody will say this. I believe we should have a mask mandate enforced, or maybe no alcohol in the church. We should have an alcohol-free church. And they say, either do that or I'm going to riot. Right, like that's the problem here. And the elder will say, well, I'm gonna do that, even though I know that angry congregant is wrong, that we are not obligated to mandate masks or ban alcohol or insert the issue here. Even though I know that that's not something we should be doing to our congregation, because it is not a biblical sin that leads to death. So they'll go to the 1 John thinking, even if they aren't thinking it specifically that way, they're thinking it's not a sin that leads to death. Clearly, wearing a mask is not a sin that leads to death, nor is not wearing a mask a sin that leads to death. Whatever anybody says, we should all have some context around that. They're neither are sins that lead to death. You may think they are a sin, but it's not a death-worthy sin. It's not. The consequences are not sin-worthy, and therefore I should acquiesce to my angry, weaker brother because, and then they'll quote 1 Corinthians, which says this in 1 Corinthians 8. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights, so your right to not wear a mask or to wear a mask or whatever you being in the right, does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, so in this case the issue was eating meat sacrificed to idols, being perfectly legal and you're able to do it as a Christian, but some who used to eat meat sacrificed to idols would be tempted to then still worship the idols that the meat was sacrificed to if they see you doing it. Back to the text. Won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. Period. End of quote. A pastor will then turn to the guy who's freaking out about COVID and think, well, clearly he's wrong. We have church liberty to wear masks and or not wear masks, or drink alcohol and or not drink alcohol. So I could say, get out of here. I'm the elder and we're totally allowed to do this thing we want to do that you don't want us to do or want us to do. But because this guy is so mad, if I say no to him, he will sin against me and against the church because he'll be even more mad. And being mad and hating your brother is a sin. And so in order to keep him from continuing to sin in rage, I will acquiesce to his rageful demand and enforce a mask mandate, or enforce a no mask mandate, or enforce a no alcohol dry campus, or enforce a all alcohol super drinky campus. I don't know what that would be. And they think that applies to this weak brother. I would personally disagree. We're discussing this pre the episode. What does this mean? What does this mean to you, actually? I should ask before I say.
This was quoted in the decision making of the elder board when the COVID. This was quoted, and what strikes me is that something to please keep in mind before we dive into the text it's not good to be the weak person.
Right.
This is not an excuse like, oh, you poor little thing, I'll be nice to you. No, you shouldn't be the weak one to begin with. You should be in a better state of mind in your walk with Christ than what you are right now. Previously in the text, Paul does say, not everyone possesses this knowledge, meaning that the idols are not actually infused with the meat that's been sacrificed to them. So you should know better. That's number one. You shouldn't be the way you are. Stop it. At the same time, alcohol and COVID were two very different issues. We were discussing it earlier. Alcohol, consuming alcohol, can prompt someone who was an alcoholic in the past to fall back into previous sin that they departed from. Like alcoholism, like over consuming a lot, drinking excessively. So if you drink in front of them, they may unfortunately be tempted to fall back into their old habits. So in that case, it would be wise, it would be prudent. They shouldn't be in that state. Mm-hmm. But it is prudent to not cause someone to sin accidentally. Road raging, though, about masks or not wearing masks, is different than accidentally falling back into old habits. There are no old habits to fall back to, number one. And two, the other one is just plain rage. Oh my gosh, I'm just having flashbacks to all the rage that happened then. So one is habitual sin that was dealt with in the past and could resurface again. You should know better. You shouldn't be there, but we're gonna help you out. The other one is you're just plain old raging.
You're sinning right now.
Yes, and you're sinning now.
Like that, to me, that is absolutely the difference. Is that one of them you're saying on the idols thing in Corinthians or in alcoholism in the modern day, you're saying you could tempt me to sin. Please help me not do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. The person who is very passionate and angry and currently hates their brothers who aren't wearing a mask. Let's be real. There definitely were people who wanted no mask mandate. They wanted to outlaw masks in the building, but they were outnumbered at least 5-1, even in conservative churches, by people who wanted to do the mask mandate, and they're much angrier. So I'm just playing. It's been 4 years now. I hope we're a little detached from it. And all things are forgiven. I forgive you all. But they come to pastors and they're very passionately angry. They're afraid because they have bought a lot of the news, or maybe they rightfully bought the narrative about how dangerous COVID was and that masking would really help. And so they say this needs to be done. It's kind of like an administrative thing, like we need lunch at 3 instead of 2. But they were afraid that lunch at 3 was going to destroy everybody. So in this way, they're afraid that this administrative non-sin issue, mask wearing, was going to destroy them, their family, their congregation, whatever. And so they were angry. They were hating their brothers, believing their brothers to be foolish and evil and murderers for not wearing masks. They would come to the elders and say, you need to stop that brother who's sinning against me. You need to mandate that we stop sinning against each other and whatever. And that right there, the rage, the hateful rage from the one wanting to control their brothers in Christ over something that is not a biblical issue, that we have the Christian liberty to decide whether or not we want to do, is the sin. And so when the elder decides to acquiesce to the sinful request, it is aiding and abetting sin. Unlike the idol worshiper or the alcoholism tempter, when they ask you to not do something, they're not committing the alcoholism or the idolatry. When they ask you to help them not do the idolatry, the hater is hating when they ask you to enforce their demands on the congregation. And so I would say to acquiesce to that brother or sister in Christ is to sin yourself. You're aiding and abetting sin on that person. And so that's when I would say yes to this passage being used to resolve conflict, but no to it being acquiesced and allowing ragers to get their way. And that is, I think, a very common issue when it comes to especially elders acquiescing to congregants, is like the loudest, most upset voice tends to get their way. And it's because partially because of this attitude, and part of it is just somebody is really angry. You kind of can get out of their way because they're crazy and you don't want to get hurt. But part of it is this thinking, oh, clearly they have a problem. We're going to let them continue to have their problem. It's not helping them. And I think you're actually aiding and abetting sin there. So I would strongly be averse to using this passage to avoid conflict mitigation in the case of somebody raging against something that is not appropriate in church.
And I will speak on this issue too, because there was a solution that was found that made almost everybody else happy, which was, let's just have the church outside where you can have the spacing that you want. You don't have to wear masks. You can't, if you really want to, you can. You don't need to because you're outside, as you know, per what the government was saying. So you're not closing down. You're not going all virtual, as some people were saying. You're not just fully meeting inside, cramped in. Okay, it's outside. It's wonderful. And yet, some of the people that were demanding the masks, they left. So to me, what that suggests is you really wanted things done your way. And it upset you that even though there was a compromise that allowed the church to meet, you were upset that it didn't happen exactly as you were demanding it.
And frankly, just to be fair, I knew people who also left churches for the opposite reasons, meaning they wanted nobody to be wearing a mask, and they didn't want a mask mandate, and a church decides to do a mask mandate, and they believed that was a sign of weakness or sin, or that they would be being caused to sin by living a lie that masks were required, and so they left. I am conservative, so I hate to do it, but here's the shots at the conservative side. Mask wearing it's not in the Bible. Like, you can draw principles from things, but frankly, it is a matter of Christian liberty, and your elders are at liberty to tell you to wear a mask. They are. They have different spheres of authority over you than the government does. And so they absolutely have the right to say, if you're going to attend the church that we all attend, please wear a mask because we believe it is the proper course of things. And be subject to your elders in that. That's what I would say. You would disagree with it, just like you would disagree with maybe lunch being at 3 instead of 2. But you have to be subject to it and do it happily. So I was not somebody that wanted to wear a mask, but I complied with the mask mandate as far as when the church demanded it. I understand the many excuses we make on why we might not be subject to the elders because we want to show them a lesson or whatever. There's so many reasons why you might make an excuse for yourself to not be subject to the elders. But in this case, it wasn't a life or death issue. If your elders decided it, I would say be subject to it. Don't be one of the people adding to the problem. So maybe not an enlightening episode on conflict, because it's all stuff we kind of intrinsically know. Like, when you hear these things in the Bible, you know that it is righteous to be nice to a brother who's trying not to be tempted to sin. Intrinsically it is good to forgive brothers without even having to approach them in conflict for slights against you. You know that it is good that the elders be your leaders on matters, and that elders should not lord things over you. Like, we all know this from the Spirit that we share in common together in Christ. But it is good to review these things every once in a while, because we do tend to forget, and we come up with our own philosophies that override these ones when we are dealing with conflict, because we are trying constantly to self-justify ourselves. And I'm speaking for myself here, so I know that these things are harder to do than they are to read. But hopefully reading through them again gives us good conflict resolution skills when we are in a conflict next in church.
I was going to say, yes, we may know these things, but do we actually do them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. Any closing comments?
Not for me, no.
All right. Well, that's why we found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ, who manages all conflict and will eventually squish all his enemies and regenerate our hearts and make the world a perfect place where there is no, well, I don't know. Will there be conflict like this? Probably not like this. There might be different heavenly conflict. I'm not sure, but not like this, right? This is like petty, dumb conflict. Anyways, till next time, we talk about something completely different. I've been Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right has been
Sebastian, the archivist.
You can find us on podbean.foundcause.com and download all of our episodes, audio only though. If you want to see us on video, you're going to have to go to YouTube or Facebook, where we are posting all the time every week. We're also on iTunes and Spotify and wherever else you might find your podcast. Until next time, when we talk about something completely different, thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.